Hello and welcome back. Spring and summer is a time for new growth and taking bold action together. So we hope these stories will inspire you to live boldly, take wise chances, and with our friends and family make a difference together. Today we will be reading Old Tales Retold, or Perils and Adventures of Tennessee Pioneers by Octavia Zollicoffer Bond. And it's an old one. It's a precious one, so I'm going to try as hard as I can to be gentle with it. So lean in with the spirit of adventure, grab a friend, and let's enjoy the story together. The Fall of the Alamo. It was the spring of 1836, and I know that's Texas. I am aware, but it's a good story. And it's in this book, so it counts. It was in the spring of 1836. The Texas prairie surged in continuous blows of bloom under ceaseless Texas winds, while three men were nearing the end of their journeys across the plains. They were typical frontiersmen in appearance, fully armed with guns and pistols, as well as long bowie knives thrust into the belt of their hunting shirts. Through differing... Oh, Jade. Okay, you're fine. Are you bored? She just put her head on my shoe and just sighed. Thank you, honey. I appreciate the support. Let's see. Though differing in many respects, each of the rough borders carried in the bosom a patriotic heart that burned with zeal to uphold the cause of American independence in Texas. They had ridden together hundreds of miles through perils from wild beasts and hostile Indians for the sole purpose of going to the assistance of those Texans who were resisting the Mexican despot Santa Anna. Together they had braved storms and floods on the way to reach the town of Bexar, since called San Antonio, where Colonel Barrett Travis from North Carolina had collected 145 Americans to withstand the advance of the whole Mexican army. Okay, I'm going to say that again. 145 to withstand the advance of the entire army of Mexico. Okay, just thought I'd clarify. The case of the Americans was known to be desperate, Unless relief and force should speedily reach them, they were doomed to destruction. 3,000 Mexicans under the red banner that meant no quarter were marching upon the place. Nevertheless, the frontiersmen eagerly pressed on towards the flag of freedom, which floated its stripes and single star of Texas over Bexar. The youngest of the three, who acted as guide for the party, was but a simple bee hunter from the woods of Arkansas. He had beguiled the time with many a jest and anecdote on the way, and at the moment was singing the last lines of an old song. But home came the saddle, all bloody to see, and home came the seed, but home never came he. That is an uplifting message on your way to tackle probably dying. Uplifting. But I guess it's, when you deal with really difficult stuff like the military or, yes, honey, you're fine. There's a lot of dark humor there. The singer had turned to his companions, explaining modestly that there was a girl on Red River waiting for his return who had sung that song to him when he left home. No girl is waiting for me, said the man on his right, with an accent that betokened a better education than that of the bee hunter. I have come out to Texas to stay and live an honest life, or else die in fighting to uphold free government against the tyranny of Santa Anna. I have promised our friend here to give up gambling as a calling and turn my back on an evil life. To this, the third man tersely replied, Be sure you're all right, thimble rig. Then go ahead. Then after a reflective pause added, By giving your life to freedom, you may yet win an honorable name. Most men are remembered as they died, not as they lived. Usually true. One of you, he continued, has forsaken his sweetheart to fight for Texas. The other has given up his way of life, and not to be behind you, I have left my family alone in my cabin down in the Cane of Tennessee, 40 miles from town. As soon as I heard that the Texans were fed up, I felt that I must join them. My wife begged me to stay, but if every man waited for his wife to tell him to go to war, we would all stay in our homes. The last speaker was a man of striking appearance, his swarthy skin and dark bright eyes showing below a fox skin hat gave his face the look of a wild creature of the forest. Born and bred a backwoods man, he had chiefly depended on Mother Wit, I like that, Mother Wit, and not his gut, but relied on Mother Wit and contact with the world to supply what had been left out of his education. He was in the habit of boasting humorously that he could spell with any of them as far as crucifix in the speller, where he had left off at school, and declared that he wanted no college degree, but a degree of common sense. Hey, that is very valuable. Much more valuable, if you ask me. Strongly built and muscular, he was a hunter of big game in the forest, his exploits in the wilderness of his native Tennessee being favorite themes for fireside tales throughout the state. In truth, he was famous as the best shot in the United States with his antiquated gun, Betsy, for this was the notorious old Davy Crockett of Tennessee. Ah, see, told you. His quaint sayings and speeches on the hustlings and in the halls of Congress had been household words in many states besides his own. Such was the trio who was hastening to join Colonel Travis with a fixed resolve to become members of his devoted band. They watched their chance, eluded the Mexican outposts, and slipped into the death trap from which less brave men would only have wished to escape. As they entered the American lines, cheer after cheer went up from Travis's men. Old Davy, with Betsy on his shoulder, was worth as they believed 12 common men, and the other two were welcomed as his friends. Travis and Bowie, and all the reckless men of the border they commanded, recognized Crockett as the match for the hardiest among them in courage and endurance. His unfailing good humor. Can you imagine being so cool and so awesome? You know, that just the sight of you gives hope to an entire group of men that are staring down the barrel of death. That's amazing. Let's see. His unfailing good humor and his odd turns of speech made him the center of interest among his comrades. It was his droll wit and unlimited store of anecdote. Am I saying that right? Right? Anecdote. Yeah, looks funny. Okay. Of anecdote. Anecdote. There it is. That kept them in, it's like he's not getting a shot or something. And kept them all in heart while they were awaiting the approach of the enemy. And when the Mexicans eventually surrounded Bexar and it became necessary for the American patriots to retire to the Alamo, an old mission house near the town, which they converted into a fort, Crockett was conspicuous among those who set about making it secure. He and his friend, the bee hunter, were active in planting the American flag on its battlements, and the latter burst forth with patriotic song as its folds floated in the air, and a clear, full tone of voice that made the blood tingle in the veins of all who heard him, the Arkansan sang. Up with your banner, freedom, thy champions cling to thee, they'll follow where you lead 'em, to death or victory, etc. An effort which was greeted by 3 cheers from all within the fort. Still later, when the Mexicans, having entered the town of Bexar, began a furious cannonade. Do you need to come up? I don't know how that's going to work. Come here. You might leave. Come here. Oh, Indy, I'm sorry. Oh, we're just trading one look-alike for another. Are you his backup dancer? You just had to come up here, huh? All right. Can you lay down? I got you in your bed, but I haven't gotten out yet. Or are you just here to try to stop me? You here to snuggle or stop me? Just don't throw yourself off my lap. Let's see. Made me lose my place. Okay. Okay, yeah, we sang the song. Okay. Still later, when the Mexicans, having entered the town of Bexar, began a furious cannonade against the Alamo, it was Davy Crockett who was most skillful among the sharpshooters. You just came up here to get rid of him? Is that what happened? Or you just want me to stop so you thought you'd get rid of him? We're not done yet. They haven't finished. They won't know what happened. That's not nice. It was Davy Crockett who was most skillful among the sharpshooters in picking off their artillerists. Betsy never told me a lie, he would say, taking aim at a gunner. She always sends a bullet just where I tell her, and immediately a Mexican would fall. In this fashion, with Betsy's help, he killed no less than 5 men at 1 cannon. Though other men in the fort were almost equally skillful, the Mexicans they slew were quickly replaced with new men. Well, yeah, there's a whole army of them, from the reinforcements which poured into Bexar at Santa Anna's call. It was useless to expect a handful of men, however brave, to hold out against his overwhelming numbers of trained soldiers. If help should not come immediately from Golid and Refigo, whither messengers had been secretly sent, the Alamo was lost. And if it should fall, the defenders would have small chance of their lives, for no mercy needed be expected from General Santa Anna. Realizing their desperate situation, Travis exhorted his men to fight to the last extremity. The shout that answered him showed that the men understood the full meaning of his words. They were resolved to sell their lives dearly. But to make sure of their steadfastness, Travis drew a line in the ground with a sword and said, "Those who want to fight it out with me, come inside this line. Those who have had enough and think they can escape, go outside." Every man of them stepped inside the line except one, a Mexican who went, no one knew whither. On the very next day, the messenger to Golad was spied coming back across the plain on the run. Half a dozen Mexicans were after him. No time must be lost if he would be saved. "Go ahead," shouted David Crockett to a small party, including the bee hunter, who hurried out with him to the rescue. "Be sure you are right, then go ahead." The sudden onslaught scattered the pursuers, but in the excitement of the chase after them which followed, the Americans went so far as they were cut off by a new squad of the enemy, who got between them and the fort. Thus they were forced to fight their way back, though 10 times their own number. In trying to reach the gate, the bee hunter was mortally wounded. With Crockett's help, he managed to get inside the fort, but did not live long afterwards. At midnight, as the breath was leaving his body, the poor bee hunter was heard softly singing, "But home came the saddle, all bloody to see, and home came the steed, but home never came bee." The sharpshooters were still doing all they could to hold the enemy in check until help should arrive. But on March 3rd, Davy Crockett wrote in the daily record of events which he kept throughout the siege as follows: "We have given over all hopes of receiving assistance from Golad or Vigo." The entry for March 4th was, "Shells have been falling on the fort like hail during the day." And on March 5th, it was pop, 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 boom, boom, boom throughout the day. No time for memorandum now. "Go ahead, liberty and independence forever." This was the last entry. In spite of all their efforts, a great gap had been battered in the wall, and there was nothing to keep the Mexicans from entering. The fort was stormed before dawn on Sunday morning, March 6th. Rank after rank, battalion after battalion, the enemy moved forward under cover of darkness and poured through the breach in 4 columns, aided by scaling ladders, axes, and crowbars. It really is like the Battle of Helm's Deep, isn't it? Oh, okay. Wow, that's quite an entrance. Oh. Yeah, it's getting sad, huh? Though the case was hopeless, the bordermen met them boldly. There was no question of yielding, for the Spanish bands were playing cutthroat as a signal that no quarter was to be shown. And above the church of Bexar, the red flag had not ceased to wave for 15 days in token of vengeance against the rebels. The Mexicans dashed in on a run and soon drove the Texans to close quarters. Then followed a hand-to-hand fight with pistols, bowie knives, and guns that were clubbed. The watchword of the American patriots was "God and Texas," and their cry was "Victory or death." One who witnessed their heroic struggle and lived to tell of it was a woman who was acting as nurse to Colonel James Bowie, the second in command, a brave officer from North Carolina. Bowie like the Bowie knife, that James Bowie. Though Bowie was prostrated with typhoid fever, he had his couch placed where he could see the fray, and at times take part in it from his bed. In the course of the fight, a Mexican ball grazed the nurse's chin and gave Colonel Bowie his death wound. All around was tumult and destruction. Every American was fighting to the death. The dead and dying strewed the stone floors of the fort, and in places were heaped up as if the spot were a veritable slaughter pen. Many, many more Mexicans were killed than Americans, yet there were but few defenders of the Alamo left at the end of the half an hour. Half an hour! Wow. The dying Colonel Bowie unfortunately fell into the hands of the Mexicans alive. Lying mortally wounded, he was discovered by 2 of the officers, one of whom asked the other, "Do you know him?" "I think," was the reply. "That is the notorious Colonel Bowie, who invented the Bowie knife." There you go. Whereupon they dispatched him in a particularly cruel manner. Colonel Travis had also been mortally hurt by a bullet wound. As he staggered under the shock, a Mexican officer rushed upon him with a drawn sword. The sword of Travis leapt to meet him in the air, and each sunk his weapon into the breast of the other. At daybreak, David Crockett still held out. The old hero was almost alone. With a few comrades, he had retreated to the inner citadel. There, in an angle of the fort, he stood with his back planted against the wall, with his shattered rifle in his hand, and a ring of dead foes piled around him. At his feet lay Thimblerig, the gambler, who had died fighting for freedom and redeemed his ill-spent life. Trained battalions had fallen back aghast before Crockett's obedient weapon until finally General Castilian himself had to come in person with fresh troops. Before the undaunted backwoodsman was taken alive, he and 5 others surrendered under promise of protection. Now Santa Anna had issued instructions that no quarter should be shown in any case, but Castilian was not cruel by nature, and seeing that all the other Americans were dead, he decided to lead the prisoners to headquarters. Saluting his commanding general, he said, "Your Excellency, here are 6 prisoners I have taken alive. What shall I do with them?" Santa Anna's brow darkened. Casting a fierce glance at Castilian, he answered, "Why do you bring them to me? Have I not told you how to dispose of prisoners?" Acting on the hint, several officers plunged their swords into the bosoms of Crockett's companions. The old hunter, left alone, fixed his keen eyes on Santa Anna. As though he were closing with one of his forest adversaries, he sprang at the Mexican commander's throat, but before he reached his prey, a dozen carbines were emptied into his body. There was a smile on the sturdy Tennessean's lips when he fell, a martyr to liberty. He was the last of all the defenders of the Alamo to die. Every person in the fort had been put to death with the exception of a woman, an infant, and a Negro slave who were only spared to be sent to General Houston, commander of the American forces, with an offer of peace based on the condition that the Texans should submit to Mexican rule. To this offer Houston, who was another indomitable Tennessean, made answer to Santa Anna, saying, "True, sir, you have succeeded in killing some of our bravest men, but the Texans are not yet conquered." Later events proved the correctness of Houston's assertion. The Texans were up, as a quote, to stay under their independence was achieved. In the month of April 1836, at the Battle of San Jacinto, their battle cry was, "Remember the Alamo." With the slogan, they fell upon the Mexicans, and at sundown, Texas was free. Well, I hope you enjoyed that very serious, very important, but very sad story of the Battle of the Alamo. I'll see you next time.